Hello, everyone. Welcome. Thank you for joining us. This information session is for applicants interested in general operating support through the 2023 Community Grants Program. I'm John Chang, Senior Program Officer, and I'm based in the Portland office. My pronouns are he and his. Before we dive into the agenda for today's webinar, I'd like to start by acknowledging the land which we live in. Indigenous peoples have long held the land itself in great reverence. Utilizing long-standing traditions, we would like to acknowledge the land upon which we currently stand in and use. The land which unites us and reminds us that we are all Oregonians, working in partnership to create a better future for all of our communities. This land has created a vibrant and loving home for us, and we give thanks to the tribes who have been its stewards since the beginning of time. We would like to acknowledge all Indigenous peoples of the lands encompassed by this current state of Oregon as we know it today, including our 9 federally recognized tribes and our urban Indigenous populations. We are honored to be visitors upon these lands and to work in partnership with Native communities comprised of individuals who stand over 5 million strong in the United States today. We extend our heartfelt gratitude to both the ancestors and the descendants of these tribes, as well as those present today, for sharing our vision for a better Oregon. So thank you. So just a few announcements as we step into the next hour. All participants are going to be on a listen-only mode. You may ask questions via the chat, the Q&A feature. We'll do our very best to answer them. We ask that you focus your questions on the spring cycle and topics about the program that are pertinent to you and other applicants. For more individualized questions, we're offering one-on-one meetings with regional program officers. You can find your region's program officer information on the Community Grants webpage. Today's session is being recorded, and the recording will be shared on our webpage. If for any reason you have to step out, just know that the recording will be available later for you. So with that, let me share our agenda, and that should be the next slide. We'll start off with an overview of OCF, including introducing the Community Grants staff team. We'll then do a quick review of the Community Grants program, stressing program goal, funding priorities, and new elements for the Community Grants in 2023. After this overview, my colleagues will also cover eligibility details and key dates. This will be followed by what to expect when you engage the online LOI and application in MyOCF. As we walk through the LOI and application, we'll share the criteria for what makes a compelling, strong proposal. We hope that what you'll hear from us today will be helpful and answer your questions, but if not, we'll have a bit of time at the end of our webinar through some Q&A to answer some other questions. Again, feel free to ask questions in the Q&A chat feature. We'll do our very best to answer these questions for you. I'll now hand it over to Niyati Desai to share about OCF's mission.
Thank you, John. Good morning, everyone. My name is Niyati Desai. I'm the Director of Community Engagement at OCF, and I use she and her pronouns. It is my pleasure to be with you all today to share some exciting funding opportunities with you. This year, 2023, Oregon Community Foundation celebrates 50 years as a community foundation. Since 1973, our mission remains the same: to improve lives of all Oregonians through the power of philanthropy. Oregon has experienced significant change over 50 years. However, one thing remains true is the incredible level of generosity and care that exists among our neighbors, our colleagues, friends, and family. Next slide, please. One way to demonstrate our commitment to our mission is through the investments made in Oregon communities. To date, we've invested over $2.2 billion to 10,850 organizations. Oregon Community Foundation maintains strong relationships and a focus in specific issue areas such as arts and culture, education, the environment, health, and economic vitality. Unlike most community foundations, we aim to support a broad geography, which includes all 36 counties of the state, both rural and urban. We recognize the disparate impacts on certain communities and demographics throughout our state. And this work is only possible through strong partnerships between our network of donors, volunteers, and organizations just like yours, who are leading the change through direct service, community building, advocacy, and more. The Community Grants Program has shifted its focus in recent years to expand its reach and increase access to those communities who have not historically had access to funding and philanthropic support. The changes you will hear about today represent our efforts to listen and respond to the evolving needs facing Oregonians and the community organizations that serve them. We will continue to work to design funding opportunities that support a wide range of organizations through flexible as well as targeted financial support. We're excited to continue this impact and celebrate our 50th year with all of you. Next slide, please. We deeply believe in the value of having our programmatic team live and work in the communities that we serve. OCF believes it's critical to maintain a regional presence across all regions in Oregon. You can see here that we've divided our state into 8 regions that are served by 5 OCF offices. We have offices located in Bend, in Eugene, Medford, Portland, and Salem. Our regional program officers are here to support you and serve your region. You will hear from many of them today, and we encourage you to connect with the program officer serving your region through the Community Grants webpage. Thanks again for your partnership and service to Oregon communities. We're going to now step into some specifics about the Community Grants program. Next slide. And before I turn that over to the program team, I want to thank you all for your patience in the recent weeks as we worked through some changes and have rescheduled this webinar. To clarify exactly what those changes are, they include some updated category to eligibility. So we've shifted from 2 categories to 3. The intent behind this was really to maintain the intent and the definition of the term culturally specific, which was developed by the Coalitions of Communities of Color here in Oregon. So we developed a 3rd eligibility category. So the categories are now small and rural, culturally specific, and organizations specific to populations facing significant bias and/or discrimination, which includes LGBTQI+ communities, immigrants and refugees, and persons experiencing disabilities. And we will dig more into these definitions in just a bit. In addition, we decided to omit the requirement to provide staff, board, and participant demographic data at this time. We're asking you to provide that information in a narrative form as well. We updated the review criteria categories and some of the wording, and our goal here was really to support all of you in organizations who have experience in these different spaces across a continuum. And finally, we streamlined our application and our guidelines to limit redundancy and make the process clearer and easier to understand. So please make sure you are working off the most recent program guidelines document, which was published on February 22nd and available on our Community Grants webpage. Now I'll turn it over to John Chang.
Thank you, Nate. I just want to give an overview of the Community Grants program. The Community Grants program is the oldest and broadest grant-making program at OCF. Strong OCF donors, volunteers, and OCF staff have executed this program for over 20 years. The Community Grants program exists to support healthy, thriving, and sustainable communities through responsive grant making to address community-defined needs. The goal is to provide access to flexible funding to organizations meeting the most pressing needs in rural and urban regions across Oregon. We know the needs of Oregon communities far exceed the funds available through the Community Grants program. While we are unable to meet all of the grant requests for funding, we are still very excited to provide in 2023 at least $7.2 million in grants to the community. For the spring cycle, we'll be offering approximately $3.5 million of the $7.2 million for general operating support. I'm going to hand this over to Rachel to speak about funding priorities, and then we'll look at some new elements in the 2023 Community Grants program. So Rachel?
Thanks, John. Hi, I'm Rachel Alm. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm the program officer for Central and Eastern Oregon. And I work closely with Cheryl Putty, who's on the screen with me as well. She's the program officer for Eastern Oregon. So the funding priorities for community grants as listed on this slide reflect our belief that impactful, creative, and sustainable solutions come from the people closest to the issues being addressed, especially when implemented by organizations trusted by the community. We'll prioritize funding approaches that clearly address community identified needs in support of the populations listed on this slide. I want to acknowledge that these identities and communities can be, and often are, intersectional and complex. For example, we list here people living in under-resourced communities and/or communities lacking critical infrastructure. What we're noting is our intent to support communities that have higher proportions of low to moderate income residents and access to fewer public supports. However, there isn't a specific formula that we require for you to demonstrate to show that you meet this criteria, nor is this intended to be tied to any specific geography, as we know both rural and urban communities can fit. And when considering intersectionality, we realize there may be some overlap between this priority population and others. For example, people living on low incomes and people who are homeless, houseless, unsheltered. My colleagues will share more about what makes a competitive proposal that's aligned with these funding priorities. But first, I'll hand it over to John M. to share more about the new elements in the 2023 Community Grants Program.
Yeah, thank you, Rachel. Hello, everyone. I'm John Moriarty. I use he and him pronouns, and I'm a senior program officer working in the Southern Willamette Valley and the South Coast, supporting Lynn, Benton, Lane, Douglas, Coos, and Curry counties. So in the spring of 2022, we invited 95 nonprofit organizations to participate in focus group conversations about our community grant program. And of those, about 44 chose to participate either in a group or an interview with us, and we received some really rich feedback about the program, some of which aligned with changes that we were already exploring, some that we felt we could begin to implement fairly quickly, and then some that will probably take more time to fully develop. A couple of the things that we heard and wanted to act on quickly were the desire for more flexible funding and a less burdensome application process. So we're piloting a couple of changes that reflect some of that input. First, we're using our 2 cycles, spring and fall, to offer 2 distinct types of funding: general operating support in the spring and what we're calling organizational enhancement support in the fall. And that fall cycle will include support for new or expanded programs and projects, capacity building, small capital projects, that sort of thing. Second, we're introducing a letter of inquiry or LOI process for both cycles in an effort to minimize the upfront investment of time and effort on preparing an application. So this will also provide a quicker turnaround for letting applicants know, you all know if you apply, if you're going to be invited for a full proposal. So that information will be able to turn around a little bit more quickly as well. And then finally, I want to note that all organizations that submit a letter of inquiry must also complete the OCF organization profile form as part of that process if you don't already have one on file. My colleague Joel Harmon will talk more about this in detail a little later in the webinar. Next slide, please. So as a reminder, this particular webinar is focused only on the spring cycle. So the information you're going to hear from here out is really focused on the spring cycle, and it's meant only for those organizations which are eligible to apply for general operating support. And as Niyati mentioned earlier, these are namely small rural organizations with actual operating expenses in their most recently completed fiscal year of $250,000 or less. It also includes culturally specific organizations with any size budget located anywhere in the state of Oregon, or organizations that are specific to populations experiencing bias and/or discrimination, also with any size budget and located anywhere in the state of Oregon. My colleague Deb Vaughn will talk more about how we define these types of organizations in just a couple of minutes, but I just wanted you to sort of reinforce those broad categories. Maximum awards in this program are $40,000, but they will never exceed an organization's annual operating budget for the previous year. And due to limited resources and what we anticipate is going to be a lot of need and a lot of interest, it's unlikely that we'll be able to fund maximum awards very frequently. If your organization meets the definition of one of these 3 types of eligible organizations, again, small rural, culturally specific, or specific to populations facing discrimination and/or bias, you may submit an LOI in this spring cycle, even if you received a community grant award in 2022. If you received a community grant award in 2022 and your organization doesn't meet one of these definitions, you're not actually eligible to apply in 2023. If you have a question about eligibility, feel free to contact your regional program officer. You know, if you're in the Southern Willamette Valley or South Coast, that would be me, and then or a number of my one of my other colleagues on the call. So from here, I'm going to turn it over to Deb for this next slide.
Hi, thanks, John. My name is Deb Vaughn, and I use she, her pronouns, and I'm the Regional Program Officer for the Northern Willamette Valley, working in Marion, Polk, and Yamhill counties primarily. And my section is going to cover more detail about the Community Grants Program and how we define different types of organizations when it comes to eligibility for this cycle. And Niyati alluded to these a little bit earlier in the presentation. And we'll move to the next slide. To be considered for funding under our definition of a small rural-based organization, an applicant must meet both of the criteria on this slide. The Community Grants Program uses the same geographic definition of rural as the Ford Family Foundation, deferring to their expertise in identifying communities that are truly isolated from resources. We prioritize support for smaller rural organizations because of this isolation. So a qualified applicant must also have cash expenses for the previously completed fiscal year of $250,000 or less. To be considered for funding under the definition of a culturally specific organization, an applicant must meet all 5 of the criteria on this slide. The first 2 criteria are focused on the internal structure of the organization. If an organization has leadership and program staff who reflect the population it serves, and its mission is specific to that population, its services are culturally specific. If an organization's leadership does not reflect the population served, but it has engaged members of that population in program development, then its services are likely culturally responsive. I want to be clear that in this cycle, we are supporting organizations that are culturally specific. The next 2 criteria on the slide are related to the position of the organization within the external community. We ask that the populations being served acknowledge and view the organization as a specific resource for their community, and that a majority of the individuals served identify as members of that community. An example of a culturally responsive organization would be a mental health provider that has specific programs for the Latinx community. Those programs may be run by and serve people who identify as Latinx, but the programs themselves operate under the umbrella of a larger organization with a broader mission and service community. A culturally specific organization would be one that is entirely focused on the Latinx community, although other community members may utilize their services. The organization's board and staff would be primarily made up of members of the Latinx community, and the organization itself would be recognized as being specific to the Latinx community by those who utilize its services. Finally, this grant program is focused primarily on supporting communities in Oregon. However, we recognize that communities can exist beyond borders on a map. If you have questions about geographic eligibility, you can feel free to reach out to a program officer to discuss your organization's work. The final eligibility category is for organizations who are specific to populations who have experienced significant bias or discrimination. These criteria are very similar to the previous slide about culturally specific organizations, and as in the previous slide, applicants qualifying under this definition must meet all 5 of the criteria on the slide. With that, I'll pass things over to Joel.
Hi, I'm Joel Harmon, Grants Management Associate, and with this slide, I wanted to highlight a couple of the most common reasons that we experience delays in being able to establish legal eligibility for an organization. Number 1 is fiscal sponsorship documentation. Now, if your organization is an eligible 501c3, then this doesn't apply, but if your organization is fiscally sponsored by a partner 501c3, then you must provide documentation. And this will be an official agreement outlining the fiscal sponsor relationship that is signed by authorized representatives of both parties. As these relationships can change, your documentation on file with us needs to be no older than 1 year. And the number 2 reason why we have delays in establishing legal eligibility is that organizations most organizations need to be registered with the Oregon Department of Justice in order to be eligible. This is in addition to the eligibility with the IRS. This process can take a few weeks. So if you have any question about whether or not your organization is registered, go to the Oregon Department of Justice website, navigate to the charity section, and then search for your organization. Now, there are certain types of organizations that are exempt from this requirement. Places of worship, government entities are a few examples. Finally, in order to consider your letter of inquiry, we must be able to establish your organization's eligibility by the end of the application window, which is going to be March 20th. In 2023, as John mentioned earlier, we are requiring organizations to fill out or update their organizational profile when submitting their letter of inquiry. The organizational profile allows OCF to share your letter of inquiry with donors and our network of funders. And if you decide that you don't want to submit an LOI, we still encourage you to complete your organizational profile to keep OCF staff and OCF donors updated on your work. The link provided for you here will connect you to the organizational profile form. Your organizational profile will typically include your mission statement, the primary populations that you serve, and any current projects or needs you have over the next 6 to 12 months. We find that organizational profiles that are action-oriented or time-sensitive are well received by OCF's donors and other funders. Links to the profile form can be found in the RFP program guidelines as well. And in this next slide, we're going to show you where you find that organizational profile form on the dashboard. If you look up in the upper right-hand corner of the screen, it says organization profile right there. That's going to be the button you press to get to that form. So to ensure that you don't miss this step, you're going to be prompted to complete the profile form just before you officially submit your letter of inquiry. And please note that the button that takes you to this page, which is the review and submit page, will not appear until you have completed all mandatory fields of the letter of inquiry. That means that you'll see green check marks next to each section on your dashboard. So if you don't see a green check mark, then that's the section that you need to do a little more work on. And now I'll send it over to Amy, who's going to talk about some key dates.
All right, thanks, Joel. Hi, everyone. I'm Amy Drake. My pronouns are she, hers, and I'm the program officer for Southern Oregon. So that means that I support Jackson, Josephine, Klamath, and Lake counties, and I'm based out of our Medford office. So on this slide, you're seeing some of the key steps of the process and the dates for the general operating support grant cycle. As John Moriarty mentioned earlier, you'll notice that we shortened the overall grant cycle to be 3 months instead of the previous 5. This change is thanks to the feedback that John talked about from former applicants who asked for OCF to be nimbler and more responsive to nonprofit needs. The LOI submission period is March 6th through 20th. Until March 17th, program officers across the state, all of us on this call, are available for virtual-only 30-minute meetings, 1 per organization, to support those of you who are interested in applying for general operating support. The links to set up these meetings are on the Community Grants website under the Set Up an Appointment with OCF Staff heading. Once OCF receives LOIs in March, program staff and volunteers will begin the LOI review. Review happens by region, with regional program officers working with regional volunteers to review LOIs from that geographic area. Reviewers will use the rubric, which is shared in the program guidelines, as a starting point for scoring and evaluation of LOIs. Once those decisions are made in April, OCF will notify both the declines and send invitations to those who are selected to move further to submit an application for funding. Invited LOIs will have 2 weeks to complete and submit their application for funding. And this will be in addition to and different from what was asked in the LOI. Program officers will also offer additional 1-to-1 virtual meetings during this time for those who are declined to share feedback about that decision. Once OCF receives the applications in May, program staff will review and recommend those applications to the OCF board. The OCF board will finalize their decisions in June, and OCF will then notify applicants of award and decline decisions shortly afterwards. So we're going to move on to talking specifically about the letter of inquiry now, which I'm going to abbreviate to LOI. So we've talked about how we're introducing an LOI this year, which will be the first step in the application process. This step will provide an opportunity for all eligible organizations to share information with OCF about who your organization is, the role you play in your community, and the work that you lead. And this LOI will be available through the My OCF portal. As I mentioned, trained staff and community reviewers will utilize the information that you share to determine fit with program eligibility and priorities using the provided review criteria and scoring rubric. So based on the outcome of this step, applicants will either receive an invitation to submit a full application or they will be declined for funding. In the program guidelines and in this webinar, we've included the criteria and scoring rubric for both the LOI and the application. These tools are provided to support and guide your process in applying and allows OCF to be more clear about the information that we're looking for in our review process. We highly encourage you to use the rubric and the review criteria to determine what is most critical to share in your LOI and/or in your application. And again, you can find those rubrics in the program guidelines, which can be downloaded from the Community Grants webpage. So now I'll share a quick overview of the LOI questions for the spring cycle. So there are four major sections, which you're seeing on the screen here. Section 1, the narrative, is focused on your organization, its work, and who you serve. Section 2 focuses on your organizational details, such as contact information and fiscal sponsorship information, if applicable. Section 3 covers community reference contact information. This year, we are asking solely for references rather than letters of support. And then Section 4 will speak, again, if applicable, will speak to the formal agreements around a fiscal sponsor relationship. Okay. So the grant narrative in Section 1 is your space to share about your organization and the work that you do. So first, we'll ask you to identify up to 3 priority populations under which you work. So for example, you might be a small rural organization, but you also focus on serving those who are homeless or unsheltered. Or you might be a culturally specific organization serving the Asian community whose services are focused on those living on low incomes. Next, there is a question about your community and the population served. We highly encourage you to reflect on the eligibility and review criteria when answering these questions. We are seeking a clear description of your community and the populations you specifically serve. And we want to better understand the needs facing that community and the context in which you do your work. If you do have data to share, we welcome that, but we do not expect a research paper or a reiteration of census data. The next question is specific to your organization's mission and a description of the programs and services that you provide. We want to understand how your programming is uniquely designed for the community you focus on, or how you adapt and respond to the needs of diverse community members. There's also an opportunity to share about your staff and your leadership. If your eligibility states that staff and leadership must reflect the community that you serve, please describe that here. We also want to hear about how the community you serve is represented in planning and decision-making, for example, on boards, and partnerships, and councils, planning groups, and so forth. And finally, we want to hear about how the community you serve supports your activities and services. Section 2 asks basic questions about your organization and executive director, as well as the counties you serve and your operating budget for the last fiscal year. This is also where you'll list the name and contact information of your fiscal sponsor, if you have one. So, references of community support. We are asking you to provide 2 references who can speak to the impact of your organization and community, and who can speak to the involvement of the population that you serve. These individuals should be active community leaders or partners representing the population that your organization serves. OCF staff may reach out to these references if additional information is needed to evaluate your LOI. And so we recommend that you do let your references know before you list them. Finally, the only required attachment for the LOI is only if you need to do this, of course, but is proof of fiscal sponsorship relationship. And again, this only applies if your organization does not have a 501c3 status or is not a government or tribal entity. No other attachments are required for the LOI stage. All right, and now I will turn it over to John Chang to share about what makes an LOI competitive and compelling.
Well, first and foremost, I'm just so excited to see all these questions going through the chats. We're trying to answer them as fast as we can. So just continue to bring them in so you all know we'll have some time at the end of this to answer some of those questions that may have not been answered. So just want to make sure I reiterate that. As shared earlier, we're providing a copy of the review criteria used to determine a compelling LOI. There are really two critical elements that make a strong or letter of inquiry. First, the letter of inquiry should share a meaningful mission that aligns with your organization's programs. And then secondly, the letter of inquiry, the LOI, should explain how the community being served is genuinely engaged in the work you do. So let's look at the mission and program alignment element first. So that'll be on the next slide. So compelling LOI really will show a strong alignment between the mission of the organization and its programs. Your mission and programs should reflect the communities that you serve. So for example, if the mission of a small nonprofit is centered on providing resources to foster families that care for kids in under-resourced rural areas of Oregon, a strong LOI would explain how the organization's counseling programs or health services directly impact foster children lacking essential health services. Additionally, a strong LOI will explain the organization's commitment to adapting to the needs of the community being served through its programs. So building on the prior example around foster children living in rural regions, if you're serving foster children in maybe a frontier region, you might want to share access practices or that you use to ensure you're prioritizing these marginalized families and children often overlooked by other agencies in Oregon. I guess what's really key here is to really share tangible examples that connect how your mission-driven programs are evolving and or responding to address pressing issues and meeting needs of the communities of those people that you serve. So good examples really help shape your LOI. This next slide is about really about community engagement. In addition to expressing your mission and programs, a meaningful LOI, a strong LOI, will explain how the organization engages the community or specific populations served. A compelling LOI explains tangibly how people served are engaged in influential roles. They may have key positions in your organization. They may provide guidance on programs offered. Please remember the Community Grants Program funds organizations that are best positioned to meet the most pressing needs of a community. So for a really strong, compelling LOI, showing lived experience throughout your nonprofit and how that kind of engagement with the community shapes your programs communicates that you're really closest to the pressing issues facing the communities that you serve and that you can really best support them. And so in the LOI, additionally, we're also looking for really clear community support. So on this next slide, this is kind of a short list that explains what we mean by community support. I mean, share what you believe is community support. We want to hear it all, but certainly you can include relevant financial and community partnerships. We think volunteers from the community that you serve or throughout the organization is important to note. We also believe that deeper examples should explain strong participation from the communities being served at events or through programs. We really desire to understand that there is an established trust with the communities you serve. If we asked specific people that your organization serves, does the organization know you and tangibly support your community? Would they be able to cite several examples? Would they say we trust them because they've come through with really relevant programs for you? Or would they note barriers or non-responsive services? Something we really require the organization to provide in the LOI phase, as shared earlier, is contact information from 2 references of support. And as shared earlier, these community leaders or partners or even key volunteers should be directly connected to the communities being served. They should be able to speak to your organization's community engagement and your impact. So we really encourage you to put the references of community support, those folks that you know that know your organization really well can speak to your engagement. So at this time, I'm just going to have Carly walk through what to expect when you're invited to apply. So Carly.
Thank you, John. Hi, everybody. My name's Carly Brown. I use she, her pronouns. I'm a program officer in the metropolitan Portland area. I focus on Clackamas and Multnomah counties. I also focus on applications that have a statewide or multi-region impact. So we're going to discuss the details of the application for those who are invited to submit one. After your letter of inquiry is reviewed, and if you're invited to submit an application, we have two sets of questions. Section 1, updates or changes to the letter of inquiry information, and Section 2, application narrative questions for you to expand upon the information shared in the letter of inquiry. These are the questions for Section 1 of the application. There we go. What we're looking for is a major or substantial change organizationally since the letter of inquiry was submitted that's critical to share in the application. When we say major or substantial, we're talking about things like your staff changes, significant changes in the size of your staff. Are there significant changes in the finances? Is there a new contact for this application? We're not looking for slight changes in the number of board members or staff, for example. We're looking for significant changes. In a minute, we'll talk about how to really answer these questions and about our rubric that we're using. Offering here a few things to make sure you know as you step into the application. So in Section 2 is where you get to share the good stuff of your organization's work. This is the chance to share your story. You don't need to duplicate responses that were shared in the letter of inquiry. This is where you can share about your accomplishments and connection to the community, why your organization will make an impact with your work, and how you plan to learn and adapt during the work that you do. Now I'm going to pass it back to John about what makes a compelling application.
Thank you. In the application, we're hoping to understand your relationship with the community you intend to serve or support. And then second, your organization's ability to meet the needs of priority populations. And then finally, a really compelling application will speak to the commitment to learn and adapt based on community feedback. So next slide, please. In the application, what we're really hoping to understand is your relationship with the community you intend to serve or support. If you're an organization that existed for several years, we're expecting to see really clear historical tangible impact in the community. We're excited to see that. But we also know that many smaller or emerging organizations in the first 2 or 3 years are just beginning to build roots in the community, right? You're just starting to foster programs. You're beginning that outreach. Well, we're still looking for compelling work. We know you're doing it, but also seeking to understand how you're making strides towards your plans and goals to impact populations or communities or groups of people in your region. So we would expect to see this strong potential in meeting needs or serving key groups through the new or expanding programs or your outreach in your application. I guess what's equally significant to explain or to have you share is that you're positioned well to serve the communities because of the trust you're building. So share that kind of information with us. In addition to your engagement with community, we are interested in learning about your ability to meet needs of communities. A strong application really will demonstrate your organization's ability to meet the needs of the populations you state you serve. Specifically, we are looking to understand your process for reviewing and reflecting on your efforts and how you're adapting when there's an opportunity to improve or to meet those needs. Now, we just really want to share, we recognize every organization, including OCF is in a different place with their ability to meet needs of diverse communities. We recognize many organizations are learning what this means for their organization. We ask you to please be genuine in your response. Tell us your story, explain your journey, explain strides you're making as well as challenges you've had along this journey around understanding how you meet and demonstrate your ability to prioritize populations. I guess here at OCF, we're all learning and growing, and it's important to share progress because progress shows commitment and accountability towards those important goals. The last thing that makes a strong application is sharing with us how you learn from community. We want to understand your process for hearing from community and adapting your work based on their feedback. We want to understand when and how you get feedback, and if possible, share examples of how you use that feedback to adapt or modify your approach. Again, just want to emphasize, it's really important to provide tangible examples so your most authentic voice comes out in your application. All right, so that's really what makes a compelling application. Thanks for going through this portion with me. We truly hope it allows you to bring out your very best LOI and application. I know there are probably some questions still remaining. We have a little bit of time here at the end of our webinar, and so we'll take a few more minutes to answer a few more questions. And so, Carly, I'll go ahead and hand this over to you.
Thank you, John. Really appreciate that. We have some time to answer some of the questions. Just want to start our Q&A section by sharing appreciation for all of you who are asking questions in the chat and the Q&A. We're feverishly trying to respond to them, all of us here. And so I'm going to pull out a couple of questions that I think will be really relevant for several organizations that are on this call today. And I do just want to say that if you have a specific question that was not answered in the webinar today, or that is not answered on the website and our guidelines, you are welcome to reach out to a program officer in your region, and we can set up a time to answer those questions with you one-on-one. First, someone is asking if we want to meet with a staff representative separately, who could we reach out to? And I want to share that on our website, we have a link where you can reach out to our staff, and you can set up a time directly on that website to meet with us via Zoom, and we can have that one-on-one conversation with you. Okay. Someone asks, what is the grant amount for the fall cycle? And does this cycle include capital campaign funds? The grant amount for the fall cycle is the same as the amount for the spring cycle. It's up to $40,000, and capital is included as a part of that opportunity in the fall. Okay, another question is the eligibility for the fall cycle the same as the spring cycle? Could someone reiterate this one again? John Chang, could you take that one on? Can
you repeat the question one more time, Carly?
Is the eligibility for the fall cycle the same as the spring cycle?
The eligibility for the fall cycle will be different because in the spring cycle, so as Niti shared, we're really focused on specific organizations, culturally specific, those small rural organizations and those organizations that have, are serving populations that have been discriminated. So no, they will be different. It will be all organizations and types of organizations will be allowed to basically apply for the fall cycle. Spring cycle is a lot more focused on these specific organization types.
Great, thank you, John. And I just want to ask all of my fellow program officers, if you want to turn on your cameras again, you're welcome to do that so we can see your faces too.
I think we're feverishly typing away, so trying to answer these really important questions. So.
Well, if you're willing to be seen, it would be nice to see you. I have a question. This is a little bit of a tricky one. So one of them is, if our organization doesn't have a headquarters, they're fully remote, and our team works and lives in the rural areas they serve, would we qualify? Our PO box is in Eugene, but we do not serve Eugene. Does anyone want to answer that or invite a conversation about that? It was an anonymous person who asked that. Thank you, John.
Sure. Yeah, I'll step up. No, that's a great question, and those are the kinds of little bits of gray area that we'd love to pursue, because the idea here isn't to be exclusive, but rather to think about those kinds of things. And I would say that probably the first question is the operating budget, because we would still be looking at this as a rural organization if we were considering it that way, given your service area and where your staff lives. And so the question would be whether your operating expenses in the previous year were $250,000 or less, and then from there, I think eligibility would be met if that's the case. And then there's still the question of competitiveness that, you know, we'll still be working through a lot of challenges in terms of meeting need with limited funding. So hopefully that helps.
Thank you, John. That's really helpful. There was a question for organizations serving youth in foster care or veterans, both populations who are disproportionately impacted by disabilities. Would they be eligible for a grant this year? Somewhat, I can take a stab at this, and then if any of my colleagues want to add in here. So what we're looking for in the spring is really specific populations served by organizations. And so it really serves to consider what is the primary population that you are serving in order to be eligible for the spring. Certainly, you would be eligible to apply in the fall, looking at the intersectionality of the populations that you serve. Okay, here's another one. Does culturally specific include organizations that serve a majority BIPOC population representing a wide variety of race and ethnicities? And I wonder, John Chang, if you could respond to this one.
So it's a really good question. And the overarching answer is it could be, and I know that sounds very a little bit on the lines there, but we would need to know the organization and really the communities you're serving. In general, culturally responsive is different than culturally specific, and I want to make the distinction here that culturally responsive, you might have multiple organizations, you might be an organization serving multiple communities and responding to those communities, but that might not be culturally specific in a shared culture in the regards to that organization serves a specific kind of need of the community. So I just want to be really clear that it would probably be wise to talk to a program officer specifically about your organization, your mission, and your goals, because I think it would be really important to know that before determining whether you were or were not eligible, because I certainly think it's possible, but we do make a pretty significant distinction between culturally responsive and culturally specific. So.
Thank you, John. We have a question. Are organizations that are fiscally sponsored by organizations with budgets greater than $250,000 eligible for this spring opportunity? The fiscally sponsored organization is new this year, has a budget of less than $250,000, and is focused on workforce housing in rural Oregon. This has a lot of questions in here. So one of the things that we are looking at for the rural organizations with a budget of less than $250,000 is that it's based in a rural area as well. And this is a significant piece of that eligibility. It's not clear in your question whether you are rural based. And as far as the fiscally sponsored organization, we are looking at the fiscally sponsored organization as opposed to the sponsor, if that makes any sense. And so if you want to get some more details, you're welcome to talk to the program officer in your region to answer this question. Do any of my rural colleagues want to answer this any further? Okay, reach out to us personally and we can help answer that for you. Oh, okay, and you say we're rural based, excellent. Here's a good one. If our organization is invited to apply and receives a grant from a donor advised fund. Oh, okay, I just lost that question. Someone dismissed it, I think.
Carly, no, I answered it. The question was, if an organization receives an award from a donor advised fund, are they still eligible to apply for community grants? And the answer to that question is yes, they are still eligible.
Great, thanks, Deb, for popping in and answering that verbally too. Here's a question that John Chang is answering that I think would be helpful for everyone to know about applying in either the spring and the fall or both. Could you talk a little bit about what the criteria is for there?
I want to make sure I'm answering that question. So, but just is Carly, is the question around the spring cycle? Is it the question of can one apply to both cycles? I just want to make sure.
Yeah, so I've seen a few questions in the chat that we've responded directly to folks. And what I saw was, if I apply in the spring, can I also apply in the fall? If I'm not invited to submit an application in the spring, can I apply in the fall? So can you talk a little bit more about how that works?
Yeah, and so the real simple way of understanding this is you can submit your LOI and an application if invited in the spring. If you're a culturally specific, small rural organization, or the third category, or an organization serving populations that have experienced discrimination, you can submit that in the spring. If you apply, if you're invited and you apply in the spring, so I'm really clear, and are not awarded funding, you cannot apply again for the fall cycle. However, if you submit your LOI in the spring and are not invited to apply, you can still apply again in the fall, if that makes sense.
Thank you, John. I have this question that's a little complex. The one about statewide with affiliate partners. I would be happy to talk to you personally about this question, and hope that you will reach out to me, grant writer. Okay, so the other one is about eligibility. Kieran is answering this one right now. And Kieran, I wonder if you could answer this one verbally as well.
Yeah, I'd be happy to. So the question is, to be clear, if you qualify for the community grants in 2023, but receive capacity building funding in 2022, would you be eligible? I would say if you fit the eligibility criteria for spring and you received a community grant 2022, then yes, you would be eligible to apply for spring. But if you do not fit that eligibility, then you will not be eligible to apply for 2023 if you received funding in 2022.
Thank you, Kieran. Someone is asking in the Q&A, who are these volunteers who help review applications? And so I'm happy to say that we have a robust volunteer engagement in this program, and we have for decades. We involve volunteers from different regions throughout the state in giving voice to what they see in the letters of inquiry and the proposals that come in. For the spring cycle, we are specifically focused on volunteer engagement with those who are a part of, are knowledgeable of the priority populations that are being served by those organizations who are eligible in the spring cycle. So if you'd like to talk with me more about that volunteer engagement, I'd be happy to answer your questions, and you can reach out to me directly. Okay. And Deb is answering a question about the slides. Thank you. Yes, this webinar and these slides will be shared on our website as soon as we possibly can. That might take a day or two, but they will be available. You can go back to our website. You don't need to wait around for a communication from us to take a look there. There are a couple questions about eligibility based on the population served, and I would encourage those of you who are with organizations serving specific populations that aren't listed to reach out to the program officer in your region to have a conversation. It may be that if spring is not the appropriate time to apply, that the fall cycle might be an appropriate time to apply, and we'd like to talk with you and have a conversation about that. So I encourage you to reach out. Okay. Do any of my fellow program officers see any questions that they particularly want to respond to verbally and explain a little bit more about? Let's see.
Carly, which program officer is working directly with Clackamas County?
That's me.
Wonderful. I thought that might be the case, but because we have multiple program officers that collaborate to serve the Portland metro area, I wanted to make sure. So thank you.
Thank you, Deb, for that planted question. And I do want to explain a little bit about Metro Portland. So John Chang, Eva Miller, and I share the program officer work in Metro Portland. Currently, I am working in Clackamas County and Multnomah County, the beginning of the alphabet in Multnomah County. So if your organization's at the beginning, you can contact me. Eva Miller has Washington County and the middle of the alphabet, I believe, for Multnomah County, and John Chang has Hood River County and the end of the alphabet for Multnomah County. It is all on our website. You don't have to remember that. And if you find one of us and not the other, we're happy to help you and figure it out for you. And who serves Salem? That's our very own Deb Vaughn right there.
Oh, thank you for asking. I look forward to reaching out. Carly, I wanted to ask, maybe if John Chang or Niati could address which resource we would prefer organizations look at in terms of the population of their community. My instinct was the most recently completed census data, but I'm gonna pass it off to somebody else if we'd prefer a different resource. Especially for organizations that are right on the cusp of our cutoff, this feels important.
Yeah, that's a really good question. I'm going to open that up a little bit to the entire staff, but I would say, Deb, I concur with you that's really the right source. But I think does anybody? I just want to open that up to a few others if they would felt like other resources were available. Okay, I'm seeing a lot of head nodding and not a lot of objections, so I think that's probably the best resource.
Thank you, John. I think with that, we're about at the end of our webinar. I want to express appreciation for all of you for attending today. We really look forward to discussing with you, and if not that, looking at your letter of inquiry. We are a resource to you. Please find us on the website if there are some questions that aren't answered. We are endeavoring to be as transparent as possible with the information that we have on our website. So you will find lots of information there, and you are welcome to set up an appointment with your region program officer, and we will meet with you via Zoom or phone if that works for you. And look forward to this cycle and continuing our partnership. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.